What type of question is this?
Necessary assumption.
Necessary assumption. What should we look for first?
Like a flaw.
Yes. How do we find a flaw? Okay, you read the passage, and when in that passage, oh no, see here's the thing is I've already read it actually, and then I see necessary assumptions, and then I look back and if I didn't already do this, I would do this now. To find the flaw, what do you look at first?
Conclusion.
Conclusion. That's the starting point for anything.
Okay.
Because you can find flaws between like premises, but that may not ultimately be relevant to the conclusion. And then the argument's not really flawed. Like maybe there was a jump between two premises, but those premises were not necessary for the conclusion or background information, or like we are analyzing the wrong things, right?
Okay.
So what's the conclusion here?
The conclusion, this practice clearly should be acceptable.
Yeah, so when I see a conclusion like this, it's a little abstract because the phrase "this practice" is like, I need to make that concrete, like it's referring to something else.
Yeah.
So what is the practice that they're referring to?
Predatory pricing.
Predatory pricing. So now what's the actual conclusion?
Predatory pricing is acceptable.
Should be.
Should be, yeah.
Should be acceptable. Okay. All right. Now, I don't know how much you remember from the other premises, but is there anything in this conclusion that sticks out to you as unsupported by the rest of the premises?
No. Well,
there's a word that is flashing neon at me right now.
Acceptable?
Yeah. Why?
Because it's never brought up.
Never brought up. What is acceptable? What's not acceptable? We don't know.
Right.
Like we'd have to make that our own judgment.
Yeah.
So, what is the premise that they give to justify the conclusion that it's acceptable?
So they don't really justify it.
Well, they do. Well, they try, right? They go on and they say because even after its competitors go out of business, the mere threat of renewed competition will prevent the company from raising its prices to unreasonable levels.
Okay.
So we should allow them to do that because.
So that like sort of is the gap back, or the bridge back, or it's the gap that needs to be bridged between unreasonable levels, or like keeps the company from raising its prices to unreasonable levels to an acceptable practice.
Yeah, I guess anything that puts people in a situation, or companies, I would say, in a situation where they're not going to return to their unreasonable levels or their prices is acceptable.
Okay, that makes sense. I think it just like threw me off that like I forget to focus on the conclusion, and I got really caught up on the threat of renewed competition.
Yeah.
That I didn't.
Yeah. I have a question about you. My issue is any pricing practice. This was about predatory pricing.
Yeah. This is a bad answer choice for a necessary assumption question, but it's the best of 5. It's very strong.
It would have been a sufficient answer.
Yeah, any project that does not result in unreasonable prices should be acceptable.
That just seems way out.
It's very strong, but let's go through the rest. What were you debating?
D.
D.
Yeah.
It is only competition or the threat of competition that keeps companies from raising prices.
Does it have the mere threat?
This is a sufficient necessary flip because if what the passage is saying, we have to assume that the threat of prices raising will keep them from raising prices. Right? It's the threat of the companies coming in that's going to keep them from raising their prices. We have to assume that that's true. We don't have to assume that that's the only thing that will keep them from raising their prices.
Then don't we not have to assume that any pricing practice that doesn't result in unreasonable prices should be acceptable?
This is something where I don't like the answer choice, but at least it's going in the right direction. And so let me put it this way. I really don't like this answer. I agree with you. It's very strong. But if I said to you something weird like this, if I said to you, you like ice cream because you're taking an LSAT, because you're in this LSAT class, right? Now, when push comes to shove, I'm assuming that at least one person in this class likes ice cream, necessarily.
Yeah.
The assumption that everyone in this LSAT class likes ice cream seems way too strong, seems sufficient. But given that reasoning, to make the conclusion make sense, we have to assume that everyone in the class likes ice cream because that was the only premise I offered to prove that you like ice cream. Like, it appears in my head, it appears that I am assuming that everyone in this class likes ice cream. Because that was the only reason I gave to justify that you like ice cream.
So essentially it is because this practice should clearly be acceptable because prevents somebody from raising its prices to a reasonable level.
Yeah.
So
I
you just wipe out
really,
the
I
middle.
really don't like the any practice. Like, what about other practices? But I feel like it's the
Like
best of five.
bankruptcy would prevent them from raising prices.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think that's necessary, but
Apparently it is.
I think they're gonna fall back on, well, it's the best of five. It's going in the right direction, at least in terms of if then statements.
Okay.
Suzanne.
Yeah, I don't have a question about